Hi everyone, and welcome to our book review today. We're going to be talking to Daniel Knowles, a student at the University of Newcastle, who will give us his personal insight and review of the book The Holocaust, Events, Motives, and Legacy by Martin Housden. So welcome, Daniel. Why don't you give us a quick summary of the book?
Yeah, no worries. Martin Housden sets out to discover how the Holocaust was able to occur in such a modern world, where something like this seemed literally impossible. He explains the roots of anti-Semitism in not only Germany, but Europe as a whole, and how it was able to become the Holocaust. Through evidence consisting of primary and secondary sources, Housden explains step by step how the treatment of Jews escalated through the many hundred years prior to the events of the Holocaust. In doing so, he outlines what motivated these actions in the context of the time and in a world that was enduring the Great Depression. Housden sets out to explain how the planned mass deportation of Jews led to genocide, and how the Third Reich was able to commit such atrocities when so many people opposed the mass killings in the first place. Lastly, Housden outlines the legacy of the Holocaust and argues that these events are still making a difference today.
Wow, okay, so it must be a pretty controversial book. Do you mind telling us just like a little bit about the author himself?
Yeah, no worries. So, Martin Housden, he's a reader in modern history at the University of Bradford in America. He's written many books, I believe over 10. They deal with topics such as the League of Nations. A lot of it is based around the Third Reich and Nazism. So yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Great. So, what did the author Martin Housden, what did he set out to really achieve with this book?
He goes against the theory of cumulative radicalization of Germany against Jews, and he compares it to other theories like that of Ian Kershaw's. He thinks that the treatment of Jews in the Holocaust had been planned for a long time, rather than a series of small steps that ended up leading to the Holocaust.
Okay, great. How did the author structure the book? Like, is it chronological? Does it tell it from start to finish, or is it different in some way?
I actually liked how he structured the book. I started when I started reading it, the first chapter, I thought it was going to be just chronological, but as you look at the chapters, you can see that each chapter deals with basically a different category. So, chapter 1 is anti-Semitism and Jewish policy up to the start of World War II. Chapter 2, the pursuit of the Holocaust. The third, the motives of the perpetrators. Chapter 4, how bystanders reacted, which I thought was really interesting because you don't really hear about how the German people themselves reacted, and he even goes into talk about how the Allies reacted and how he thinks that they couldn't really do anything more than they did to help out the Jewish people. Chapter 5 is the victim's view of the world. So yeah, he basically explains it in categories rather than structured chronologically.
Okay, great. What do you think about the author's use of evidence like primary sources and secondary sources? Do you think he used them well, or did he overuse them?
Yeah, so he uses a lot of primary sources. For example, he quoted some of Hitler's earlier speeches to reinforce his arguments against the theory of cumulative radicalization. And to quote Housden, as he states, given how the Third Reich worked and the nature of the speeches given by Hitler at key points during the development of the Third Reich, it is implausible that he did not effectively order the final solution at some point. And his use of secondary sources is really extensive, and at times his own argument gets lost in the mix of others. His use of many reputable secondary sources does, however, convey that he is not biased in his writing. For me, the third chapter of the book seems like a slight waste of time and feels more like a book review itself. Housden spends too much time debunking works like Daniel Goldhagen's book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, and shares other critics' thoughts, to which his own argument once again gets confused. At times, the author's use of evidence seems questionable, as he sometimes refers to the sources as one lady put it, or simply a Wehrmacht soldier, rather than going deeper into who they are. In conveying the horrible treatment of Jews, Housden utilizes Anne Frank's famous diary, and uses Helena Birnbaum's memoir to share how some Jews stuck in the ghettos could use bribery to improve their chances of survival. So yeah, all in all, Houston does well to include sufficient evidence to create a convincing argument.
Is there anything that you believe the author could have done better?
Yeah, I believe that Houston could have gone into more detail in regards to Israel and how the legacy of the Holocaust has created a plethora of problems in the Middle East now. Apart from that, I'm pretty convinced, and I think he's done a pretty good job.
So finally, would you recommend this book, and what would you rate it?
Yeah, I definitely recommend this book to anyone that wants to read more into the Holocaust and how it happened, why it happened, and how the events of the Holocaust still affect the world today in many respects. I think I would rate the book 3.5 stars out of 5. The 1.5 stars mainly because of his use of sources, and sometimes they could not be extremely convincing. But apart from that, it's a great read.